Right, so yeah, this is the native GTK UI, which limited to the dialogues. So first we'll do the usual demo that the OpenGL transitions are still working, which they are. So what was native in 6.0 was the file dialog, which has always been native. The tooltips became native in 6.0. Popovers, which are used in Impress and are used in Calc as well. And then the menu bar and menus became fully native menu bar and menu in 6.0. Coming on then to 6.1, I made all of the message dialogues native as well, and then a handful of the simpler dialogues, such as insert break there. So they all became native dialogues as well. Now moving on to 6.2, in 6.1, also more complicated warning dialogues are also native as well, such as this PDF export dialog. All right, so 6.2 then, what we have is 180 or so generic dialogues. They're the simple ones that just have one page in the dialog, and then there's about 41 dialogues that contain multiple tabs, and then there's about 100 plus actual tabs, and they're all combined together in multiple ways. Different dialogues will use different tabs, and the same tab will reappear in different dialogues. So the background tab will reappear in about the paragraph dialog, the character dialog, and so on. So in 6.2, which is released, I think, soon enough anyway, pretty much from my perspective, all of the major dialogues are converted over to native GTK dialogs. So that's the page dialog in Writer, character dialog, format page, etc., etc. There's a few ones that are still large dialogues that are not converted that I get to at the end, but you'll definitely get the overall feel, hopefully, of fully native GTK dialogs until you start exploring some of the edge cases and some of the calc dialogs in particular. So here's an example of what the format character looks like when it's a native GTK dialog. So what has changed here especially is that obviously in the GTK one, where you have up there, it says Liberation Serif in the GTK entry, and underneath it you have a GTK tree view. There are two separate widgets that are now working together. Previously in the VCL land, there was a single exploded VCL combo box where the drop-down list and the combo box entry were part of the same widget. There are now two separate widgets, which means that in practice that when you tab between them, you're tabbing twice. There's two different elements there. People seem to be reasonably happy with that. They haven't noticed and they haven't complained about it, versus a lot of other things that have been complained about that we'll get to in a bit. Right. Just a quick summary of how we got here, which isn't that interesting at this point, but we converted the file format that the widgets are described in from a legacy file format to GTK Builder file format as the first step. That was described in terms of GTK widgets, but actually implemented with the VCL widgets. We added some extra layout widgets so we could get all that dynamic layout support. And we could reuse then the Glade GUI editor, which gives us that large number of individual files described in user interface. Second step then is the translation file format. Again, we migrated from that legacy translation file format to the same file format that everybody else uses for their translations, the PO-MO combination. That's another large piece of work, which went relatively smoothly considering the size of it. That has given us as a side effect the ability to handle plurals in our translations, which we hadn't before. So that's a kind of a little cherry that we finally got working, that we finally implemented for 6.2 as a kind of a payback to translators for the pain of getting this far. They now can get their plurals working properly, which is a side effect of what I was doing. Right, so given now that everything is in the GTK Builder file format and that the translations are in the expected MO file format, you can then, in theory at least, load up those converted UIs with the native GTK support for doing that, and you get the native GTK dialogs out the other end. Add a little bit of a transitional API between the VCL stuff and the GTK stuff, and it all works beautifully with your VCL stuff as the fallback for the platforms that aren't using GTK, Windows and Mac, as well as the not interested in GTK things like KD and so on. So the fallback is there and still used. Okay, so a couple of problems with all that, of course, is that because we had used the GTK builder file format but written our own parser for that, a few areas are kind of fuzzy as to what they mean. Obviously, when you do two implementations, they went two different ways. So, for example, we were using GTK adjustments just to set the initial values for spin buttons, whereas in the case of GTK, once you actually map a button to that adjustment, if you have two mapped to the same adjustments, they're locked together. So you had to go back over all those spin buttons that were sharing GTK adjustments and just duplicate them. Again, as to when you have a bunch of radio buttons together, as to which one is the leader of the group, there's a little bit of kind of fuzziness over how that works. So we had done it a different way than the way GTK does it, so we need to go back and redo those .uis to do it the way GTK expects. Then there's what to do with custom widgets. So custom widgets needed to be manipulated a little bit so we could have a bridge between GTK there, and we ended up with the same API we have for our existing VCL window. You can inherit from a new thing, a custom widget controller if you have a custom widget. Typically previews are a couple of small interactive things, and you can keep the same, you can inherit from a new thing and everything should work the way it worked when you inherited from our old VCL window. Accessibility was difficult, a long story, but it works. For those custom widgets, for the native widget to use the native GTK stuff. I don't know if there's anybody here from GTK, but if there is, these were the three issues that I had a problem with at FOSDEM, not FOSDEM, but at the LibreOffice conference, that have been solved in a fragile way that works for now, but may not be long-term great. First one is a straightforward bug. If there is enough, if under Wayland, if there's enough entries in the GTK combo box, at some point the GTK combo box will not, the GTK combo box's menu will not appear when you click on the button. The bug URL is there. There's a couple of bit of complexity over the set of circumstances in which it arises, but it will arise once the menu gets long enough and the selected entry is far enough down the menu. But it just so happens that if you just manipulate the combo box in the right way, you can get it to not happen. So we can use this little hack at about 30 entries in, and it affects slightly the GTK combo box menu placement. So it's not as beautiful when you get to over those 30 entries as it would be if the bug didn't exist. But at that point, it's better to have a menu than perfect placement. So that one is resolved in that sense. That would be nice to get fixed upstream. The other obvious one is type ahead in a GTK combo box, both when it is just a combo box with no menu appeared. We want to be able to type into it so we can select the next entry in the list automatically. That's straightforward enough. You can just listen to the key press event and then you run it through our existing quick selection engine, the same mechanism we use for the VCL one. So if we were happy how the old one works, then we have to be equally happy how the new one works. The problem there then is that when the menu is active in the old VCL situation, you could type into the menu and you could automatically select the entry there. Couldn't do that with the GTK one, but people wanted to do that, but you don't actually have direct access to the GTK menu from the GTK combo box. You're not supposed to care about that, but there is an accessibility API there, GTK combo box get pop-up accessibility. Once you have that, you can cheat and you can get the accessibility get widget from that, and that gives you the GTK menu that you're not supposed to have access to, but you can get access to it, and then you can install all the stuff you want. So that works perfectly fine, but it's potentially fragile in the future. Yeah, notebooks. This was the big one. Yes, I got 5 pages on I got 5 pages on GTK notebooks and the horrors. There's nothing really wrong with the GTK notebook, the GTK's notebook. There's nothing wrong with it, but we have used in our tab control. We have kind of abused it a lot, and we have multiple tabs in these things. So what works against us in the GTK one is that the default theme that I use and most of Fedora uses, and a lot of people, the weighted team has got really large font and padding, so each tab takes up a lot of spaces. So it's big. On our side, we have a load of tabs and dialogues. We have up to 16 tabs in the Impress style dialogue, so no matter what, there's a lot of tabs there in that. So first thing I tried was just the built-in stuff in the GTK notebook. First, just say that we put scrolling tabs at the top, so when the tabs don't fit in the notebook, you get these two scrolling things on each side. But when you do that, you can't see all of your tabs at the same time, so you used to be able to see them. Now everybody's unhappy, you can see them. Okay. Then in some themes, let's say like the default Ubuntu themes, the tabs are quite small. You say, well, there's all this space going to waste at the top, so let's keep putting tabs into the top until it no longer fits. And at that point, if they no longer fit, switch to putting them down horizontally down the left-hand side. Again, the GNOME the Human Interface Guide suggests that when you get to over 8 tabs, you put them down the left side rather than across the top. But again, you come up with like that Impress dialog where you have 16 tabs, and they're not going to fit all the way down the left-hand side either. So again, there's significant pushback there. All right, so let's try the double-decker tabs, the same double-decker tabs that you have in the VCL version, and see can we do something there. We use 2 notebooks, one on top of the other, no content area in the top one, content area in the bottom one. Let's see how you go with that. But you've differently there, then the notebook always have to have one active tab. And that active tab is out of place if you have, one active tab in the bottom, but if you no active tab in the top. So then you try to look at ways of maybe getting rid of that active tab. You can block signals to the notebook to let it know, you can select the active tab, and you can then block signals to the notebook, remove the active tab, so that that notebook can be tricked into not picking a new active tab. Success, you think. That's great. But then the draw callback of notebook will refuse to draw anything if there's no active tab. Except, of course, if you're actually dragging your active tab to another window. So then you're wondering maybe, can you position the GTK notebook in some way that, it thinks it's in a drag and drop state and refuses to draws the rest of the tabs, not the active tab. That doesn't work anyway, because that just crashes in all sorts of horrible ways. So it was a bad idea in the first place. So let's see if that active tab, maybe just pretend that it's there for some sort of a reason if you can't get rid of it. So there's this active tab at the top right there with a kind of a down arrow on it or something that's indicating that the next row is active. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that wasn't very popular either. But the good bit is that all the tabs are now visible at the same time. All the tabs are back at the top, but this extra one is of no use to anybody. Yeah, so let's try and see, can we theme it into oblivion? So yeah, let's just theme it into invisibility in 0 by 0 size. And now we're back to double-decker tabs like you had traditionally with the VCL ones, except now rather than being themed to look like the GTK ones, they are the GTK ones. And you can keystroke between them all. When you get to the end of the bottom row, it restarts at the next row, and it all works fairly seamlessly. So yeah, that's finally in for 6.2. So notebooks were a major struggle. All right, so let's I think I've done this a few times before, but just in case anybody hasn't seen what the progress is, this here is an example of a popover. Wherever you use calc, who knows. Popover appears as you type along and to give you the tints. Yeah, I think native. They've been around since 6.1, so we see them all now as well, the native message dialogues. Obviously, at this point, actually now that this year, there's a native tooltip as well. This year, if the quality good enough to actually see animations in the presentation, yeah, I think it is. You can see that they're animated checkboxes and things like that. Let's see. If we do format table, yeah, we've got an overlay scroll bar here as well now, so you get all the good stuff. A side effect of all this as well is that preview widgets like this on high DPI, on GTK high DPI cases become automatically high DPI'd, so fuzziness disappears from a lot of these widgets once they get converted over like this. Yeah. I think I've shown the screenshot of the tab dialogs. And just keystroking between them shows that they do like the old ones did, and it all keystroke accessible. Okay, that's the tabbed one. Yes, so also as well, small little bits and pieces. Should be able to show that we have the icons for spell checking are available in the native GTK combo menu, just like the previously were. And small little thing that you now have, if you export as PDF, for example, or anything that has a password control, that if you accidentally hit the cap locks, you get the built-in GTK caps lock indicator on thing. So you're getting the smaller benefits as well as the obvious ones. Yeah, and one of the most recent things, and kind of fits in with this morning's talk, is very most recent thing we have here, is that now the Firefox persona theme integration thing will work with the native GTK menu as well. So up here in the menu bar, the native GTK menu is drawing the top portion of that background theming picture, and then the VCL classic stuff from the controls down is drawing the bottom half of it. So that integration now finally works as well. So that works. Yeah, so that's the walkthrough. The list of the walkthrough. Yeah, so what's left to do? As I said earlier, most of the major dialogues are done. What's left now is that insert table of context dialog and the insert section dialog in writer are the two dialogues left that are causing a little bit of difficulty. The difficulty in the writer one is the preview widget. I have a version where the preview widget renders, but the size of the preview widget is very odd. You're running a kind of a captive version of a captive instance of writer to render that preview, and it's not interacting well with things, but we'll get there in the end. And the other one is the insert section dialog, where there's condition entry, and the condition entry itself is the only custom widget I've come across so far that I've made an effort at least, that has a custom drag and drop handler. So that's not something that I've implemented yet, so I need to implement support for custom drag and drop to do that dialog. That's straightforward enough. The insert table of contents is just buggy at the moment. It'll get there in the end. A lot of the calc dialogues have a kind of a shrink to specific entry and button feature that's not particularly difficult to do. It's just that I haven't done it yet, which means that a lot of the smaller calc dialogues are blocked on implementing that. And then the last other one is the calc's insert header footer is using an edit engine in a unique way that nothing else is using. So those are like the four blockers. So apart from that's why what isn't converted yet remains as it is. Once they're out of the way, I expect that things will be completed pretty rapidly. And I think that is pretty much all I have to tell you. Okay. Has anybody got any? What? Does anybody have any questions on any of that?
The buttons in the persona look a little bit awkward with a grey background. Is it a transparency issue, or is it
here, visible here someplace?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
The toggle button.
Where?
When you talk the left alignment.
Down here, something. Is it only the top menu bar here is?
No, I mean the toggle button. That's the left alignment. It is your style.
Is it on screen here?
Yes.
Yeah.
In the middle of the screen?
Yes. In this screen, only the menu bar is native GTK. The other two rows are the VCL stuff pretending to be GTK, and the problems with theming there is one of the reasons why this theming never works. So yeah. yeah, eventually getting these all native is doable as well, but we have to work kind of from the outside in, like we'd get native toolbars, and then be able to get native bits and pieces, end up with a native scroll bar. That this scroll bar here is not a native scroll bar, but I think it is possible to eventually end up with all these as native bits, and then these is like the custom widget thing we've put together for those dialogues. You'd have this writer would be a custom widget with a native toolbar on the right hand side, and so on. So it's all doable, but that is another step for another day once the dialogues are all under control, if ever. Anything else? Sorry, yes?
How much work will it be then to go to GTK 4?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's not out yet. I think anything at the widget level will be mostly okay unless, for instance, that accessibility one that I mentioned, if that's removed, for example, that makes things a bit more awkward. But I think anything at the widget level will be fine, and our difficulties will be more likely at the pre-existing stuff we have for our existing kind of fake stuff. I think that'll be where it'll be more difficult, where, for instance, we had this big Cairo canvas that we draw everything to, and then we blit that in the draw. How that's going to work in GTK 4, I mean, I've asked some people to say that'll keep working, but it'll no longer be the preferred way of doing things. So I think this work will be okay, and I think our prior work from before this, which is still necessary, may require rework. Okay, thank you.